Alright, hello everyone. For today's lesson we're going to be going over steep spirals. For our references for today we're going to be using the Airplane Flying Handbook and the CAU Maneuver Standards. So, first off, let's start with what is a steep spiral. A steep spiral is a spiraling descent, usually over a certain point, and generally used for emergency purposes. As we can see in the AFH, they state that the objective of a steep spiral is to provide a flight maneuver for rapid dissipating substantial amounts of altitude while remaining over a selected spot. So, where might we use this? Engine failure over a specific runway. We could use that to descend down, maintaining that radius around that runway and keeping us close without going too far out. Another example could be a passenger having any sort of distress or any issues. We could use that to stay where we're at, descend down to a lower altitude, and do whatever we may do. As again, the AFH states that this maneuver may be useful during an emergency landing. A steep spiral is a gliding turn wherein the pilot maintains a constant radius around a surface-based reference point. So, the applications, any emergencies or anything like that can help us get down and land where we have to land. So, how do we do it? It is a spiraling descent, but looking over at Maneuvers Guide, the procedure is to clear the area, choose an altitude that allows for completion of at least 3 360 turns without descending below 1,500 feet AGL. So, we want to be at these higher altitudes because, again, it's an emergency procedure. We want to be able to descend down without going too low to the ground. Select the ground reference point. Again, odds are you're going to be choosing something like a runway, but you could always choose different references as long as you can spiral around that point. Set power to idle, trim for 75 to 80 knots while establishing a left turn around that reference point and maintain a constant radius turn. Again, this is a steep spiral, so we want to be able to turn 45 degrees, 50 degrees. We don't want to be doing a 30-degree turn, making these wide circles around the point. We want to keep it nice, tight as we're descending. So, maintain a constant radius, using bank to maintain constant ground track around the reference point, with bank not to exceed 60 degrees at the steepest point. After completion of each 360-degree turn, temporarily advance the throttle to normal cruise power to prevent spark plug fouling. This is just something we do for training, and in an event of a real emergency where we do still have that power, we do want to make sure that the engine stays properly working, so adding that power will help that engine. But for an engine failure, we might not be able to do that. Complete 3 turns around the reference point, roll out on entry heading and resume cruise power, and then cruise checklist complete. For the completion standards, we want to make sure the area was definitely clear, that altitude was sufficient to continue the whole 3 turns, and we didn't get either too low or didn't complete our 3 turns. Maintain a steep spiral not to exceed 60. Exceeding 60 is the limit that we have for this, but if we hold 50, 55, even 45, as long as it's still steep and keeping that constant radius, we're good. Apply wind drift correction to track a constant radius circle around the reference point. So, wind, again, one of the common errors that we'll talk to or go to in a bit. The wind can drift us around and push us, so if we're maintaining a perfect radius but we're not adjusting for a certain crosswind, we're going to be pushing. Let's say winds are going to the north, we're going to be drifting towards the north that whole time, even if we're holding that constant radius, perfect speed. So we have to understand how wind can affect us from our entry point and be careful with that. Similar to how we do circles or 8s on pylons, any ground reference maneuver where wind drifts us, we have to be able to constantly adjust when that wind becomes a headwind, becomes a crosswind, becomes a quartering tailwind, and so on. Divide attention between airplane control, traffic avoidance, ground track, while maintaining coordinated flight. Again, coordinated flight is very crucial for this as we're going down. If we're not descending, we have that 75 to 80 with power idle, and let's say we pull up for some reason with that power out with uncoordinated flight, that could lead to spin conditions, so keeping that in mind. Along with it, again, this is sort of a ground reference maneuver as we're making sure we're staying on reference with our points, so being able to look down at our points, say if we're drifting off, if we're not keeping it steep enough, if we're not spiraling, we need to be able to check between our airplane control, our instruments, and that point constantly, back, forth, Traffic avoidance as well. As long as we clear the area, make sure it's clear and make sure it stays clear, we should be able to handle that. And then ground track, again, understanding that wind drift. Maintain the specified airspeed. Again, they state in the maneuver's guide 75 to 80, but it also says plus or minus 10 knots. That perfect range would be 77, but as long as you're holding 75 to 80, it might jump up to 85, it might jump down to 70. That all depends on the DPE or depends on the instructor and how they judge it, but it states here 75 to 80, plus or minus 10 knots, take that as you will. Roll out towards an object or specified heading, plus or minus 10 degrees, and complete the maneuver no lower than 1,500. So that's how we do the maneuver. Again, choosing our point, spiraling down, keeping that nice steep spiral, but keeping our speed 75 to 80 controllable as we're descending down. And again, in emergency scenarios, you might be, let's say, leaving Bakersfield, flying over Shafter at 3,000 feet, 4,000 feet, or coming from maneuvers at 3,000, 4,000, and engine failure. What are you going to do? You're right over Shafter. You're going to start that steep spiral towards 3-0, lining it up so that way you either join the downwind or get ready to land. That is just a general application that you might use. And again, low lower than 1,500. So as you finish that third turn, you should be right at traffic pattern altitude. Perfect setup for a power off 180 or an emergency landing. So some of the common errors that we'll go through is not clearing the area. That's just with every maneuver. Always make sure that the area is clear, both visually, audibly, if you have to. If you're in, let's say, Shafter, just letting traffic know where you're at. Shafter traffic, Skyhawk, 1 Foxtrot is 3,000, spiraling down for runway 30, Shafter traffic. Just letting everyone in the area know what your plan is and what to expect if they start coming in. Inadequate pitch control on entry or rollout. Again, being able to control that pitch on entry so that way you start that spiral down, and on the rollout so that way you're not rolling out with the nose down and continuing that descent. Not controlling the bank angle to compensate for the winds. Again, wind can drift your bank or push your bank more depending on where it's coming from. So that could either sink. So being able to control that without going in excess of 60. Poor flight coordination. You want to be able to coordinate your controls, keep it within stable flight, and make sure you're nice and aligned. Again, uncoordinated flight has its own hazards, so we have to be aware of that. Ineffective use of trim. While you can do it without trim, trimming it just makes sense. If you're going 75 to 80 and you know you're going to be holding that for the 360s, why not trim it out so that way the aircraft is easier to control and easier to maintain that spiral, and then use trim again once you're rolling out to be able to hold that rollout and climb out, or hold level just fine. Inadequate airspeed control. This happens generally if you're pitching down too much or you're overbanking too much. Overbanking, and you tend to pitch down since you lose that vertical component lift. That's going to cause your speed to increase, and if you're already holding 80 or even 82, you worsen that bank, you push down a little more instead of pulling up, you're going to increase that speed and you're going to bust your minimums. Becoming disoriented, that can happen to anyone generally. Again, you're doing the 360s. If you're holding it, you're not really paying attention. You might miss your engine clear, or you might forget that you already did 2 and you're doing your 3rd one and you start doing a 4th one. You could become disoriented by focusing on those and not realizing your altitude because you went under that 1,500. So again, just keeping that level-headed focus on both the turns, clearing the engine, what altitude you're at, your bank, your speed, being able to cross-manage all that, again, with referencing your point, takes a lot of focus, and this is why this is a commercial maneuver as well, because it does command some extra control ability of the aircraft and extra presence in the aircraft. Performing by reference to the flight instruments rather than visual references. Again, you want to be able to look at your visual. This is saying this is a common error, so if you're constantly looking at your controls, I'm holding 80 just perfectly. Oh, I'm holding that bank at 55, 50, right where I want it, and my pitch is nice, my altitude's going down, and I'm busting it, but you're going to look up and realize the wind just drifted me off point, and now I'm not even close to where I was spiraling from. Being able to look at that point, look at your references, and back, forth, being able to understand that you need that visual for a visual maneuver, and you need your flight instruments to tell you within standards. Not scanning for other traffic. Again, keep an eye out. We're still in VFR, we're still PIC. We still got to make sure that there's no one coming towards us and that we're not going towards anybody else. So always watch out for that traffic. And the last one, completing the turn. Not completing the turn on the designated heading or reference. Again, we're choosing a reference to finish that turn. If we're doing 3-0 and we want to end on the downwind, we want to make sure that we're still heading on the downwind. If we do our third turn and keep it going to like an extra 180 degrees of turn, we're going to be facing the wrong direction and we're not going to be where we want to be for the end of that maneuver. So yeah, that's steep spiral.